Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining us at the table this week, Republican political strategist Garrett Mason, Director of Equality Maine, Gia Drew, and Democratic political strategist BJ McCollister. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Good morning.
Happy to be here.
First, the legislative session wrapped up in Augusta after a late-night battle over the supplemental budget. We'll have more on that in the second half, but one controversial bill that made it through was all over the national popular vote. Maine is the latest state to join the proposed popular vote compact after Governor Janet Mills allowed the bill to become law without her signature. This, of course, all means that Maine's electoral votes would go to the winner of the national popular vote. BJ, why did the governor not sign this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this is really about, one person, one vote and solidifying that. I think it's a huge victory that she let it go into law without her signature, but it's also a bit of a disappointment she didn't sign it.
Garrett?
I think Maine actually has the best model. Delegating votes by congressional district, I think it gives a stronger voice. But listen, I believe that this is a center-right country, and if we did have a national popular vote, I don't think you would see presidents going to New York City and San Francisco. They'd be going to Utah and Iowa to drive up votes for conservative candidates. So I actually, I'm not afraid of that battle, but I think other states should adopt what we do here.
Yeah, and Gia, do you think that this is actually a concern among voters?
I do. I just don't think people are that engaged in this specific way of doing it. But we've had two presidents in the last 20 years win the presidency without the national popular vote. So I do think this is a move in the right direction.
So is there some agreement here?
I'm good. I'm good with the system we have here. But if we had a national popular vote election, bring it on. The House of Representatives, if you add all those votes up, Republicans win every time. So I'm good.
We shall see. In the midst of an election year and former President Donald Trump back in court with jury selection wrapping up, his criminal trial in New York is really getting underway this week. A handful of jurors were actually dismissed after being selected. Prosecutors even asked Trump to be held in contempt over a series of social media posts. Here's what Trump himself had to say Thursday.
The whole world is watching this hoax. You got a DA that's out of control. You have a judge that's highly conflicted. The whole thing is a mess, and you have the leading candidate and leading crooked Joe Biden by a lot. He's the one that should be in trial. He's a crook.
Garrett, he keeps repeating these lines, but do Republicans really believe that this is all made up?
Well, the longer that you continue to indict him, his poll numbers keep going up. So I think you're further driving people who might have been undecided. I mean, you can't help but see that, this is a judge who has a daughter who works for a political consultancy whose major candidate is Kamala Harris. That is a conflict, and the fact that wasn't noticed is huge. I mean, you have jurors being seated in this case who are filming, Biden-Harris celebrations in the streets. So, I mean, he's not wrong, and, the political persecution of Donald Trump continues.
But BJ, this is the political system. This is the legal system, I should say, that we've come to trust in our country. Should we be trusting it in a process like this?
Well, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that he's broken the law, and just because he is a president, a political figure with a large following, doesn't mean he's above it. And so I absolutely think the way that he has frame this whole debate, to Garrett's point, is riling up his base, but it is ignoring the fact that we have somebody running for president who has a lot of legal troubles ahead of him.
And
I think one of the things I've noticed is the polling does say a lot of people who are considering Trump maybe switch their vote if he's convicted of a crime, and I think that's really important.
Do you think that's going to happen, Garrett?
It's the drive towards Listen, 91 counts that Democrat DAs or Republicans who are never Trumpers have driven at Donald Trump. So the goal has always been, let's convict Donald Trump. That's always been the goal. So it's getting harder and harder for Democrats and the left to say, this isn't a political persecution. It continues and continues. And when you have nonsense going on in the courtroom, what I mentioned before, it continues to prove the point.
The other element of this is that Trump understands uniquely the media attention around this and the ability to speak to people and share his message over and over again with his base.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just have to push back a little bit, Garrett, because just because there have been a lot of indictments against him doesn't mean that this is a political trial. It means he's doing a lot of things wrong.
I think one of the things I would push back a little bit on here is that I don't know that it is possible for Donald Trump to get a trial that is fair in New York City. I think the jurisdictions where he is being tried are being chosen by design to give him an unfair trial, and you're seeing it more and more every time he gets there, that there's nefarious purposes about where these trials are being held, and you're right. He's a master media person, and he knows how to work it. So that's what you're seeing.
We'll leave it there. Meantime, President Joe Biden officially has the backing of the Kennedy family. They joined him at a campaign event in Pennsylvania this week. Basically a snub to Robert F. Kennedy, who is, of course, running as an independent. Thoughts on this, Gia?
Well, this is very exciting. Having grown up and being born just a few miles from where JFK was born, and I do think the Biden administration is more in line with traditional Kennedys, JFK, RFK, Teddy. So I think this is, just shows that where the Biden administration is on traditional Democratic values, which align with most Kennedys. I think that this is really important.
But Garrett, is this interesting given the RFK factor here?
It's fascinating. And as somebody who, I have come from a political family, both my parents served in the legislature and my cousins served in the legislature. I did. If my family came out and trotted up on stage and said they didn't support me, I'd be pretty upset. But, what I will say I actually disagree with you. I think JFK would be a Republican today, with a lot of the foreign policy and things that he has done. I think, it's the family who's kind of gone errant. But, RFK is interesting. He brings this huge blend of, conservative and liberal ideology, and he may be the independent character that we've been looking for, not to kind of use a Star Wars quote, but he's a very interesting character, and there's a lot about RFK that I like. But having the family come out, that's a rough day.
Yeah, and BJ, obviously the concern is that he could be a problem for Biden, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just quickly, what I would note is you see the Biden campaign working to shore up these people who might be considering Kennedy, but still we see the Trump campaign doing nothing to try to bring the Haley voters back home. And so it's fascinating to watch how people are appealing to the very slim undecided margin.
Interesting to see if he'll actually need those voters, right? All right, next, the U.S. Senate has thrown out the articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mayorkas is the first cabinet secretary to be impeached by the House in 120 years. This is all over his handling of the southern border. Ultimately, the charges were dismissed without a trial. Senator Susan Collins telling reporters after the vote this week, quote, "This was an embarrassment for the Senate today and not in keeping with our constitutional role, regardless of how one may feel about the charges and regardless of how one would choose to vote after listening to the evidence." Garrett, do you agree with Senator Collins?
100%. This is a first. It doesn't matter if you don't like the charges that have been brought up against the secretary or not. It matters that he has a charge against him. Sounds eerily similar to something that's going on with former President Donald Trump right now. Republicans don't like those charges that are being hurled against him, think they're nefarious. And it's interesting how we have the double standard going on, that Democrats just say that these charges don't matter. The fact of the matter is that the Senate is a jury trial when it comes to impeachment, and they chose to derelict their duties. I love jury nullification, and hopefully it happens in the Trump case.
BJ.
Well, I would say first and foremost that this whole impeachment is a dangerous precedent, because it's not about someone, doing an impeachable offense. It's about a policy disagreement. And so at the point at which the impeachment process is weaponized over policy disagreements, you have a very dangerous slippery slope.
And Gia, the border issue is a big issue for Republicans this election year. Does that make this impeachment effort legit, or was that more of a stunt like some Democrats might?
Well, I think most Americans think the border issue is very important to address, and we noticed that, there were some bills put forward that actually would have addressed this, but the Republicans, turned their back on this, weighing and letting the former president weigh in, and the Republicans, including Senator Collins, had a chance to make some real serious progress on the border, but they chose not to do it.
Garrett?
Okay. So this is where we disagree. I think the border is a huge issue. I think it's a massive issue. It's the number one issue on the minds of Americans right now, no matter where you live. But this is where the problem lies. The first thing that Joe Biden did when he got in office is repeal catch and release through executive order. He took away all of these tools that border enforcement officers had at the border. And all Joe Biden has to do isn't pass a bill, that's a ruse. he has to sign an executive order to replace what he took away that Donald Trump did.
But should Republicans have backed the bill that Gia is referencing?
No, they don't need to. I mean, the laws are already in place. The laws are already there for them to comply with. What BJ said about, this is just a ruse impeachment, I got to push back on that. He's not following the law. He's not making sure that criminal illegal aliens are coming into the United States. He needs to stop that. So he has violated the law as secretary, and he needs to be held accountable for it. But this Senate will not do that.
BJ smiling, smirking through this, I guess. I think we're going to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break. The Weekend Morning Report is back right after this. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining us at the table this week, Republican political strategist Garrett Mason, the executive director of Equality Maine, Gia Drew, and Democratic strategist BJ McCollister. Good morning to you all. Thanks for being here.
Morning, everyone.
And Gia, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So it's a wrap on this legislative session after a late night, or really an early morning, for lawmakers in Augusta this week. The supplemental budget and a handful of other bills narrowly crossing the finish line, but not without some drama over that budget process.
This is appalling to the people of Maine. I'm appalled that to be a part of this process. I strongly urge you to vote against this motion because we can do better.
This budget is more than a commitment to individual bills or initiatives. It is a firm commitment to the people of Maine. It wisely invests in education, mental health, housing, and health care.
Garrett and BJ, I know you were both there, BJ, in the background of one of those clips. But Garrett, specifically when it comes to the budget, it seems like there is this new level of animosity between Republicans and Democrats. Is that legit?
Oh, it's not just between Republicans and Democrats. I don't know if you can put labels on this specific budget, but it has trended that way for a long time. I would say going back about 6-8 years, there's always been a minority budget, a majority budget. And, you're seeing those values play out. I think Senator Vitelli said it very well, and Senator Rotundo said it very well, that the budget is a statement of priorities and it's a statement of moral values. And, you see that reflected in those amendments. This particular budget battle was wild to watch on the floor. You saw BJ and I sitting next to each other in that clip. But, I've never quite seen that level of excitement around a budget. So it was interesting.
But Gia, is that excitement a sign that Augusta is perhaps becoming more partisan?
Well, what I've noticed this year, and I'm not there, thankfully I'm not there every day like my counterparts, so I can have a little distance from it, but it's also an election year. And so I think everything gets amped up quite a bit in looking ahead to November. And I think a lot of the people and politicians are positioning themselves, where they stake their claim. So I think that's part of it as well.
BJ, I also want to talk about the Democrats here. We've been talking about this for a few weeks now, about this divide apparently between Democratic leadership, specifically the Speaker of the House and the governor's office and Governor Janet Mills. Is that as real as it appears to be on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, look, first off, this budget has a lot of good things in it, but it also definitely was lacking. Those were the amendments that Garrett was talking about. But at the end of the day, the legislature is different politically than what the governor's worldviews are, even though they're in the same party. And I think that some of those tensions came up at the end of session as emotions were running high and people were fighting for what they thought was the right step forward, even if the chief executive didn't agree with it.
I will throw kind of a unifying argument on the end of this. Regardless of what you think about the budget, the process is dangerously broken. Voting on these type of measures at 3 a.m. it's not good public policy, and it can be fixed. Political leaders need to have the courage to fix it in the next legislature.
Another big victory for Democrats was the passage of sweeping gun safety legislation, including Governor Mills' proposal to improve the yellow flag law, a 72-hour waiting period on gun sales, and a ban on bump stocks. However, a red flag bill never made it to a vote. Garrett, are you surprised that one slipped through the cracks here?
Not really. A similar bill failed last year. And I think after the report from the Special Commission on the Lewiston shooting said that had the yellow flag law that we already have on the books be enforced, sponsored by Republicans, by the way, that we might not have had the tragedy that we had. So I'm not surprised that one happened. We'll see what the governor does with it. But I think the gun argument got derailed in a bunch of ways over this session.
Yeah, and Gia, a lot of everyday Mainers, I think, were looking for some kind of action from lawmakers, regardless of what side of the aisle they were on after Lewiston. Do you feel like they got that validation?
Well, I think it's time for common sense gun reform to take place, and I think most Mainers, especially after Lewiston, wanted to see some progress, and I think we're seeing that, and I think that's really important.
BJ?
Yeah, I want to echo all of that. I mean, the Maine legislature just passed some of the most transformative gun safety policy that they've ever passed. Regarding red flag, that bill was introduced late. Time really ran out on it, so I think we'll see that fight in another session. But it was a very good day for Maine when the legislature passed those gun safety measures.
Another big point of contention was once again around abortion, specifically regarding a SHIELD law bill. It aims to protect healthcare workers who provide abortion, as well as gender-affirming care from legal action brought by other states. You might remember a group of attorneys general in 16 states threatened legal action if Maine moved forward with this legislation. Now, if it's signed by Governor Janet Mills, Maine would join more than a dozen states with similar laws. Gia, I know you have advocated heavily for this bill. Just want to be transparent about that. Did you experience a lot of pushback?
We definitely felt a lot of weight against this bill specifically. Some of the rhetoric and some of the attacks got really violent. There were bomb threats made against the State House, bomb threats made against the sponsors of this bill. So it made the environment really tense, going to testify, to show up in person. And so, and then there were some things said on the House floor that you talked about last week about, the connection between the abortion coverage and gender affirming care and Lewiston, which was outrageous. But this is mostly in response to what's happening across the country, where more than 20 states have banned abortion or tried to stop gender affirming care. And we need to make sure Maine, takes care of ourselves, takes care of our medical providers. And I think we're doing the right thing with the SHIELD bill.
Garrett, how do we have these conversations without that animosity there?
Well, I think you have them honestly. And this is I think the bill was aptly named. It is the SHIELD bill, but I don't think it's for the purposes we're talking about. This bill came out in the first tranche of bills in December of 2022. It was worked on in secret, in private, for a year and a half. The public hearing that typically happens is a 2-week notice. This came in 48 hours. And the bill language was dropped the day of the public hearing and amended during that public hearing. People had to assume what was in it. So I think it was completely aptly named. Now, you don't do that with bills that you're proud of and that you want to see move forward in an honest way. You do that with bills that you want to push through. I've seen it done a million times in my 14 years. Like this, so let's talk about what the bill does on the other side that people were concerned about. And that's removing influence from parents and guardians and being able to say, go to Maine, get the coverage and the medical interventions of either abortion or gender affirming care that you want. And if your parents find out, you don't have to tell them and the doctors can't tell them.
BJ?
Well, look, when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, it was very clear. States get to decide how they approach these issues. And this is what's happening. The state is protecting folks who need access to care, protecting the people who provide that care. And this is directly in line with what the conservatives on the court asked for, which is for states to decide how they approach these issues. And that's exactly what this bill does.
And I'll give you that. I do think that this should be a state-by-state decision, and making those states have conversations on this is something that Europe did 50 years ago and settled this argument. But I think the problem that I have with that debate is that, medical providers, Big Med, already has plenty of exemptions. They have HIPAA, they have vaccine injury prevention protection for them. They have plenty of exemptions. If that's what this bill is about, then we should call a special session immediately and repeal it because it's not needed. But I think it's about way more than that.
All right, we'll leave it there. Let's wrap things up with winners, losers, and if no one mentions Taylor Swift, I'll be disappointed. Garrett, we'll start with you.
Man, you put that on me. I think my winner for the week is probably just the Maine people who got a lot out of this session, who got to watch the process and see a lot of the corruption and underhandedness that happens. And I'm hoping that in this election cycle we can talk about that. I think the loser this week is Representative Melanie Sachs from Freeport. She's the appropriations chair. She ran through, tried to steal money out of the highway fund and pensions and all of these unbelievable areas to take it out and do some other things with it. I think having that reversed shows that she's probably the biggest loser of the week.
Gia.
Well, I'm a marathon fan. This was Boston Marathon Week,
Yes.
so my winners are the folks who volunteered or ran a marathon. Ellen Gagiri won for the second time in a row, and she's in her 30s, and the third place winner, Edna Kiplagat, is in her 40s, so I think it's a great triumph and a great winner. I think the losers with the political process, I think we need to improve what happens in Augusta.
BJ.
I think the winner of the week has to be the activists and voices that came out for gun safety to see those bills come through successfully. And the loser of the week, and I promise we didn't coordinate this, but I did plan to say the loser of the week are all the Taylor Swift haters who are going to be barraged on social media with the new album.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's Political Brew. Thanks so much for joining us. The Morning Report is back right after this.